Matthew, this is one of the last great sailing ships that carried the American flag to the four corners of the world. This one, the Star of India, and another ship called the Balacluthe, that's in San Francisco, are the last two ships remaining of the great fleet of square riggers that sailed for the Alaska packers. Life on board these ships was very hard. The men who sailed them had to be tough and strong. And yet, as a group, they were probably the most superstitious people on earth. For instance, the old-time sailors would never whistle. Whistling sounded like the wind moaning through the rigging during a storm. Storms were their greatest danger. They damaged ships, injured members of the crew, and many lost their lives during the storm. Some of these superstitions are hard to understand. No one really knows how they got started. Today, we have women sailors, but the old seafaring men thought that a lady on board during a voyage was an ill omen and would bring nothing but bad luck to the ship and all who sailed aboard her. At the same time, all ships are still referred to as she or her. The old sailing ships frequently had a figurehead. That's a lifelike wooden statue mounted under the bowsprit, right on the front of the ship. Many figureheads were beautiful maidens with long, flowing hair, and they always looked straight ahead, as if leading the ship on a safe course. Ships often have feminine names. I can recall ships named Helene, Alice MacDonald, Catherine Sudden, and Ruby Ruggs. The Star of India was built in England and originally carried settlers to the colonies of Australia and New Zealand. There must have been many women among the passengers, but they didn't bring her bad luck, because here she is, still found, still alive.
Grandpa, how come you know so much about ships?
A long time ago, when Grandpa was just a little boy, only 3 years old, my mother, 2 sisters, baby brother, and I got on a great big steamship. We sailed for many days, all the way from Canada to England. That's where my daddy was. He would be your great-grandfather. He was in the Canadian Army then. Some of the Canadian soldiers were helping the English during World War I. We were on the ship for many days, and we kids got to play on the deck and talk to the sailors. We lived in England about 3 years. Then, when I was 6 years old, we crossed the Atlantic Ocean again and came back to Canada. Canada is bigger than the United States, and we lived right in the middle in a town called Ipswich. We were a long, long way from any ocean. But I was nuts about ships and the ocean. So I read stories about sailing ships and the adventures of the explorers, and about pirates, and the valuable cargoes that the old sailing ships carried. I read about the long voyages they made and the new lands they discovered, about storms at sea and shipwrecks, about the bravery of the men who sailed these big wind-driven ships. And I almost wish that I could sail on one of those big windjammers. When I was 12, just a couple of years older than you are, my family moved right here to Long Beach. That was an exciting time for me. I could hardly believe it was true. We were living right by that big Pacific Ocean that I had read so much about. It was along this very coast that these beautiful sailing ships sailed for the last time. San Francisco Bay, that's about 400 miles north of here, has a large natural harbor. That's where these great tall-masted ships dropped anchor. And they just rested there in the calm waters of the bay. They had no cargoes to haul. Everyone was shipping their products on the big steamships. They could go faster, and they didn't have to depend on the wind. Lucky for me, the movie makers in Long Beach and Hollywood wanted to film the adventure stories of the old sailing ships. So they bought some of these ships and they towed them down here to Long Beach. Pretty soon they had quite a fleet of these old wrought iron ships and a few old wooden ones too. They painted them up and gave them new rigging and sails so they could bring to life the pages of history and the wonderful sea stories that I had read. I spent many happy hours at the harbor watching these activities. There were watchmen on the ship to keep people off and to protect them. Most of these men had been sailors on these very ships, and they were proud of them. But one of the old sea dogs who stood watch was Bricky. I remember him well. He watched me day after day as I sat on the edge of the wharf with my legs dangling over. I think he knew I was visualizing these old ships sailing along under full sail with a white foam flying from their bows. He called this sailing with a bone in her teeth. Then, one day he invited me to come aboard. Oh, that was exciting. I ran up that steep gangway as fast as I could. Just as I got to the top, he held out his hand to me. I grabbed his hand. It was hard and stiff and leathery. He pulled me up the last few steps, and I jumped down on deck. I was aboard a real sailing ship. I looked up at the old sailor. His face, that needed a shave, crinkled into a smile, and he said, "Hello, my name's Bricky. What's yours?" I never did learn his real name. He just told me to call him Bricky. We became special friends, and he let me come aboard many times. He taught me all the parts of the ship. I learned the names of everything on the ship and how it was used. He said that he had gone to sea when he was just a boy, not much older than I was then. He let me climb the rigging, and I'd pretend that I was a sailor on an old-time ship, discovering new land. Sometimes I was the helmsman steering the ship, and sometimes I was the captain giving the orders. Bricky smoked an old clay pipe. He cradled it in his thick, gnarled fingers. His hands were calloused hard and always cupped, as if ready to grasp a rope. Bertie had a way with words. When he told about his adventures, I felt as though I was living right along with him. One of the best stories that Bertie told me was of the time he was standing bow watch on a ship called the Garside. They were in mid-Atlantic. The sea was calm, with just a light breeze blowing. Just enough wind to keep the ship moving slowly. As Bertie watched out over the great expanse of sea, he noticed the very topmost sails of the ship, just peeking over the horizon. He called to the ship's mate, who came forward to join him, and they watched as the ship slowly came closer. The other ship was not keeping to a straight course. They sent word to the captain, and he came to the bow of the ship. All three agreed. Something must be wrong with the other ship. All her sails were set, and they would fill with the breeze. Then the ship would turn a little, and the sails would hang slack. Then she'd slowly drift around, and her sails would billow out again as she caught the breeze. It was as if no one was at the wheel controlling her. The captain ordered the Garside's course changed, so that he could hail the other ship and offer help if it was needed. Ships always help each other when they can. As they came closer, the mystery deepened. They could see no one on watch. The sails continued to blow out and then hang slack. When they were close enough, the captain called out, "Ahoy there! Are you in trouble?" No one came to the rail of the other ship to answer him. He called again. No answer. So he ordered a boat out, and the mate and some of the crew rowed over to her. Bertie and the captain watched as the sailors from their ship climbed aboard this strange acting vessel. They saw the sailors go below deck. The men were out of sight for quite a while. When they came up on deck again, the mate called out to the captain, "Ahoy, sir! There is no one on board." The sailors from the Garside rowed back to their own ship. The mate reported to the captain, "Sir, that ship must have been drifting for many a day. There is one boat missing, otherwise everything is in good order. The table is set, and there's food on the galley stove. But, sir, the stove is cold, and the food has spoiled." The captain was puzzled. He couldn't abandon the unmanned ship. So, he ordered some of his crew aboard the mysterious ship, and the two vessels sailed together for the rest of the journey right into New York Harbor. None of the people of the abandoned ship were ever found.
What happened to all those people?
Yet there was nothing wrong with the ship. Why did they leave it? Where did they go? The mystery has never been solved. I feel very close to this story, for the ship on whose quarterdeck I stood, pretending to be the captain in full charge, was the Garside, the same ship that found and brought into port the most written about and the most wondered about mystery ship of all time, the Maria Celeste.
Is that ship still there, Grandpa?
No. Some 20 years later, the Garside was laid up along with some other old lusty ships waiting for the shipbreakers to cut her up for scrap. But that wasn't to be her fate. She was singled out, and once more the Grazia went to sea, but not as a beautiful full-rigged ship. She was towed out to sea and anchored, just 5 miles off Walnut. My proud ship, no longer wearing her majestic sails, became a fishing bark. But I was faithful to her and spent many hours on board, not as a fisherman, but as her former imaginary captain, standing on her deck as she rose and fell on the long Pacific swells. The Grazia and I relived some of her adventures.
Is that ship still there, Grandpa?
One evening, after the fishermen had gone ashore, she slowly nosed down and quietly went to her final resting place at the bottom of the sea. No hot torches would ever cut her up for scrap iron, and I was glad. Grandpa's dreams of sailing a full-rigged ship never came true. I don't know what your dreams are, but whatever they are, perhaps your dreams will come true.